Um, well, first off, I'm excited for the conversation. I had a meeting earlier today with a new chief procurement officer from a Fortune 500 company. She just got into the role about a month ago. And the first thing that she wanted to do was figure out what's being bought and where. And it seems to me like that is a good diagnostic to do when you're getting into a new seat. Just figure out, okay, what's been the spend across categories for the last 12 months. But it also surprised me to hear that there wasn't already some kind of spend cube or spend analytics in place already. Is that the norm across, enterprise businesses? Why is spend analytics not a more pervasive, I guess you could call it technology, or even just the one-time roll-up of a spend cube in a consulting or private equity format? I'd love to get your take on it. Or is the value not there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, can you imagine, a CFO coming in and saying, there's no ledger? No, but I mean, a CPO coming in like there's no spend ledger. It's kind of
Yeah.
like why that I've actually seen some companies where it is a material finding if they don't have that ability to actually track, their spend, and they actually treat it very seriously. But to your point, yeah. I mean, I'm going back 25 years almost, and there's the old adage, which is, spend analytics, spend visibility is job one for procurement. You can't
Hmm.
improve spend, you can't do spend management unless you can actually see that spend.
Right.
Brilliant, Captain Obvious, right? But yet, 25 years later, companies still are really bad at having good, detailed, accurate, relatively timely, spend visibility that they can take action on and drive some value. And,
So
I
so
think
why
it,
why do you think that is? And that's the question, right? Like, if it seems like it's an important, like, fundamental building block, why is that not in, like, the must-have tool set of every CPO? And why is it not more pervasive today?
yeah, no, it's a good question. I think one is there's always this we ROI everything. It is like the ROI death march on any investment on anything. And so, like, when you have an area that's obviously strategic and foundational, but yet it's like, well, what's the ROI on the spend analytics? Well, you can be
Mm,
like, technically it's zero because it doesn't necessarily, create the savings, but it's like it's the treasure finder, right? We're giving you this thing that's actually
yeah.
just telling you where the treasure is. That's pretty valuable. That's a pretty massive option value, right? But sometimes people do get bogged down in that. Sometimes it's an IT will derail you. It's like, well, we have this giant data warehouse. Isn't it great? We're
Mm,
already working on, but there's, it's so slow, not getting what, the insights that you need. So I think there's a few factors around it, as well as just companies are really dynamic. They're buying other companies. We're adding more data into the portfolio. They have varying spend taxonomies. And then you get just bogged down into this whole, well, we need the mother of all spend taxonomies, and we got to clean all in, you get all these vested interests and legacy data, and you just start, things grind to a halt.
mm,
So anyway, long answers. I think it's probably ROI, just kind of the entropy around all that, all
mm,
that inertia around all that data, and kind of just legacy systems and mindsets and whatever. And you just need to have it.
mhm.
It's like running water, right? And I'm like, what's the ROI of running water? So
Yeah, pretty high. Unless you're living in the movie Idiocracy, where it's all Brondo. Do you know this reference? It's what plants crave.
yeah.
Yeah. The ROI of water was actually really high in that movie because they couldn't grow plants without it. So I'm kind of curious, like, what do you think is, like, the hardest part about spend analytics, and what portion of companies that you meet with do you think actually have some kind of spend visibility capability? What It doesn't have to be a structured tool; it could just be a Power BI dashboard. But I think that's a compound question. But what's the secret sauce? Is it the taxonomy? Is it the integrations, or is it the actual cutting of the data? And then the second is, what portion of companies do you think actually have something in place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you hit on it. A lot of the those variables. So one is kind of just the level of detail, and kind of, and also then what is it being used for? So if you're just doing some basic drive-by sourcing events, hey, we've never really done sourcing very well. 80/20, got to get a stand up a basic spend queue, bring in some consultants, just to kind of build those wave charts, like, where are we going to go after the money? great. You can get pretty far just kind of doing some of, just getting there. But as soon as you start like expanding the aperture, just need to get a little deeper, right? As we get into spend planning or as we get into on the direct side to look at opportunities for as soon as you start like sizing prizes that are a little more complicated and require
Mhm.
higher fidelity, more accurate data, things like that. Now the analytics are getting more complicated and the kind of OIT can kind of do it and take, the AP history and
Mm,
PO3 files and kind of bring it up into the data warehouse. You start transcending that. Now you're starting to
mm,
get to great. How do we model costs? How do we actually start persisting that? How do we track time series data? How do we start getting into
mm,
forecasting? How do we start tying in all these rich set of data that we need to kind of see these more sophisticated spend and supply analytics for risk, supply chain, for all these different for, design support. And now you start getting into a different ball game, right? It's not just kind of the easy stuff. And now, the degree of difficulty starts going up. And that can be a filter when you're just constantly
right.
reacting and just trying to do the easy stuff where you can and just use the rest of your time reacting to other stuff.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I guess a question, something that we talk about a lot whenever we catch up on the phone, is the topic of AI, because it is really in the air and it's everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. It feels like every vendor is putting AI and agentic AI in their headlines. Every company we talk to asks us even about our AI roadmap. I want to get just at a high level, like, what's your pulse on what's happening right now in AI and agentic AI, good, bad, ugly? And then I would like to talk about next is what are the areas of procurement tech that you think will be most and least affected by the changes that are happening in AI? Some things will be probably untouched and some will be completely automated. So I'd love to get your take on, let's start with what's going on in the space right now. What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, obviously, I think 99% of people understand, kind of that this is a pretty big deal. Certainly, there's going to be people who are like, "Oh, this is another hype cycle," and there is, trust me, the hype is obviously in the stratosphere, right? But this isn't like blockchain. You're like, "Oh, it's all about blockchain," and you're looking at it, and you're like, "It's a
Mm,
freaking transaction registry."
yeah,
It's a great one and but how's this game changing? And yeah, I think AI is fundamentally a sea change, especially now with LLMs and agentic kind of coming into the scene. But to me, it's not. To me, like AI is not the center. To me, AI is like the Energizer bunny that is everywhere. It is fundamentally changing everything about enterprise architectures and digital, from the data modeling to process management and orchestration to application development to,
yeah,
uh, intelligence to, right. All of these elements are getting impacted by AI. And obviously, with LLMs and just really has gotten the hold of everybody as to
yeah.
demonstrating the power of what it can do in certain use cases. Now, are, yeah, but do you want to take that LLM brain and like drive it into all these little agents to try to do that for all different processes that are needed? Not necessarily. We need to talk a little bit
Right.
probably about it, but obviously it's massive and it's important, but it's a big topic and there's a lot in there.
Mhm. No, it's true. I mean, and anyone who says that they know all the answers is it doesn't, because it changes every 3 months. I'm kind of curious. Like, I feel that there is a bit of a spectrum between AI optimism and AI pessimism. Like, there's some folks where they are like 10 out of 10. This is the savior of all humanity, and it can do everything. Like, you think about like the super intelligence advocates like Sam Altman and CEO of OpenAI. On the other side, you have many people that are really skeptical. They say, "Oh, it's overhyped, it's overblown." I'm kind of curious, like, where do you fall on the spectrum? One being like, "Hey, I don't think this is as useful as people think." 10 being like, "I think this is like the silver bullet." And was there a moment, because I know there was for me, where I went from being a little bit more skeptical to like, "Holy shoot! Like, this is much more real than I would have thought. It's not a toy anymore." So I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, well, I think those people that come from different camps quite often not to go full Yoda, but they have not unlearned what they have learned, right? And this is a
Yeah.
trope with like procurement executives, they're never going to tell you like, hey, I've turned that crank, in 10 different transformations. Why do I need something? And you might not be able to. It doesn't mean you can't turn the crank a lot better and faster and deeper in this, kind of
Right.
new world. But I think anybody that's stuck in both sides of those camps are not really, they're just not seeing the value, and they need to open their eyes. And so for me, it was always I'm always like innately curious, and I'm drawn to the new technology and really trying to understand what it is and how it's useful. And so for me, for around LLMs and AI, to me, there's kind of this term that's around like neural symbolic. So it's two worlds, right?
Hmm.
So our brains are oriented as neural nets, right? And as AI has trended towards, we move from, to neural nets and deep learning, and then to, LLMs, and to, kind of building on top of that. That world is great, but it is probabilistic.
Hmm.
It is neural. It is not symbolic. It is not structured reasoning. And over on the deterministic side, right, where SaaS apps live, structured data, clear domains, clear algorithms, rules, that's kind of been in that world, and it's always like, "Oh, rules are terrible," and on the other
Hmm.
side, it's like, "Well, AI is completely it's gonna hallucinate everything." And the key
Hmm.
is making those 2 things fit together. I did a whole presentation at DPW that was all about
Hmm.
kind of bringing these worlds together to say, like,
Interesting.
yeah, AI doesn't replace SaaS. AI is SaaS, right? And it's like
Hmm.
ultimately it demands more from your enterprise architectures, and it is in turn driving a whole new class of enterprise platforms and applications. Whether it's around MCP or whether it's all these kind of different areas.
Yeah.
Those two things working together. Because if you're like Cell and agentic systems, which are basically lampreys on the shark, it's like, hey, this is
Hmm.
sharks are dead. Well, if you need a shark for you to live, you need you need SaaS apps, they don't kill the host that you actually live off of unless you
Yeah.
yourself are going to build a data model underneath to persist, where to store all that data to have persistence. And yeah. So,
Yeah, of
you know,
course. Like, yeah, you can
it,
build great self-driving software, but you still need to have a chassis to run it in, or otherwise it's just a concept, you know? Agents are a concept until they're taking action on data. I guess, yeah, it's interesting. Well, here's a question then. So you're laying out a perspective that I also share, right? A sort of spectrum between deterministic systems and just, pun not intended, higher agency systems. And I think that on that spectrum you find a lot of different modules or areas of procurement tech. What would you say, and this is the question I was asking to earlier, what would you say is the area that you think will be least affected by AI? And what is the area that you think will be most affected by AI? And I've got my own answers for this too.
yeah, yeah, no, I'd love to hear your perspective on it. So, I think anything that involves, so in that previous example, I was basically talking around the world of language models and the world of structured data models. And in the middle is knowledge models, neural symbolic, bringing these two worlds together. So, anytime there's complexity and scale and complexity around language, right? Um, that is an area, and so that complexity can be on user interface, on spoken language and chatbots, and
Hmm.
all. Great, that's fine. We improve the user interface to get the data out of our mind into the computer. But the other is just the existing data that's out there, and that could be external complex market intelligence that you're bringing in. But the perfect one, obviously, is contracts, right? And that's the area where it's had the most value, because contracts are written in a language called legalese. It's actually multiple languages, right? So it's legalese, but it's German legalese versus whatever. So you have all
Right.
these domains, and you got to be able to sift out those attributes in the metadata to be able to like understand it, and
Yeah.
then be like,
Yeah. Of course.
right? So that's the area where it adds the most value, and it will have the biggest impact. And you'll probably see that, within legal services, within obviously already in translation services, right? And things like that. So it'll work its way through. So that's where it's had the most value and impact, and it will continue to disrupt areas. But it also is just going to create better deterministic tooling to just do better automation and RPA and all that stuff that was on the deterministic side that just never got implement it because it was too unwieldy. This
Hmm.
creates a lot more value in driving that. So obviously the transactional stuff is just going to get more automated away. And anything also that's really complex has the potential to be impacted, a lot. But yeah, I don't know. What's your thought? And you just went dark. All right. So waiting for Spencer to come back because he has gone dark. Probably someone disconnected him so that he could have some birthday cake because today is his birthday. And he is back in three, two, one, and there he is.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, sorry about that. My internet literally just cut out for a second. Um, and I agree with you. I think that the CLMs are written in all the legal documents are legalese. You could also argue that they're written in the language of billable hours. So that's how you get very frothy, long documents. Um,
That's the value prop, right? You don't need as many corporate, you don't need legal involved as much. They're often the ones that are kicking and screaming, honestly, in a lot of these transformations because they don't want to be, the
nobody wants to be left behind. Nobody wants to be obsoleted. It is interesting. I used to think so my sister started law school on Monday here in San Francisco, and it's the first time I've had like someone from my nuclear family out in California. So I'm very excited she'll be here for at least 3 years, assuming she continues enjoying her legal training. But it is interesting. Like I know a lot of people who are lawyers, and I think, oh, with Harvey and all these legal tech companies coming out, is there a risk? Do you feel risk at your job? And they're like, no, we're so busy and we're so underwater all the time that I would love to have a way to offload some of our work. And so they're not, I think, today feeling like the crunch of hey, it's replacing our work as much as the opportunity to do stuff a little bit better and faster. I will say in our business, we just use ChatGPT straight off the internet with obviously in our enterprise environment to review basic contracts like NDAs because 90% of the time it's pretty vanilla NDAs, and so I just want the system to tell me, hey, are there any major red flags? Now we do have a commercial counsel who will sometimes send stuff to, but a lot of times if it's really clear that it's fine, then I say, okay, let's just go and keep moving, right? So I think legal makes sense. What are the areas that you feel like are going to be like unchanged by AI? Because people often ask the question, what's changing in the next 5 to 10 years? But they very rarely ask the question, what's not going to change in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think IT operations, I mean, obviously, plumbers and anybody that's, physically gonna, on site
Yeah.
at your opera, they'll be fine. But I do think just on IT infrastructure, they're gonna be plenty busy just moving from, legacy tech debt to moving to more modern architectures, right? Going from old, integrations to modern microservices and APIs now to composable apps and, agentic and,
Yep.
MCP and just building the whole new infrastructure. It's still got to work. And honestly, I mean, AI is introducing as much complexity as it is helping to solve the complexity in your business operations, right? So, and that's probably a temporary thing because right now there's this giant land grab in the battle of the tech gorillas, right? And yeah, things are getting more commoditized all the time through the LLMs and all the hyperscalers, right? They're kind of just
Yeah.
invoice scanning and processing, and it's just going to
Mm.
become truly like infrastructure and plumbing, right? So
Hmm.
I think IT will actually be fine. It's the folks that are just actually doing sneaker net kind of operations and just fingers on keyboards
Hmm.
that's repeatable. That's you better start elevating your value
Yeah.
prop and learning new skills. So
What's sneakernet?
sneakernet is like you basically go from one system over or swivelnet, go from one system to another and like take one
Yeah.
data from one system and another, or you swivel in your chair from
Yeah.
one to the other. So it's kind of like RPA-ish stuff. Anytime you're doing like redundant keyboard on, hands-on keyboard activity, it's the algorithm is coming for you. I mean, you really
Yeah.
need to wait.
Well, you know, you mentioned something earlier that I was sort of curious about. You said that RPA hasn't really borne out full promise, but now you feel like it might be able to. What is it that LLMs or AI can provide to RPA or automation more broadly that hasn't been possible in the past? Like, what's the relationship there?
Sure. So one of the challenges when you start layering, just take a term orchestration, and we take a thing called process orchestration, and we take a subset of that, which is basically workflow on steroids, which is basically, and you get this automation. Part of that is kind of that automation with the end user and the stuff where there were, hands on keyboards and being able to better automate and a lot of this through experience management tools and other things. And the whole technology has kind of evolved from RPA to intelligent automation to agentic, automation, et cetera. But a lot of those integrations, because ultimately when you layer something on top, you got to integrate to all the crap underneath, right? It's like one of the most complicated surgeries on the
Hmm.
face of the earth is face transplant surgery. And you're like, oh, it's just, and not to go gory here, but it's like, oh, it's just spinning, but it's like a day and a half of hooking up the new face to like literally all the systems, the circuit, and because so integration is a major issue, especially with security. All right.
Yeah.
And that those are vectors, threat vectors. And when it's built, you don't want to mess with it, right? Which is kind of one of the things why people don't want to upgrade. So
Yeah.
I think one of the key things is taking these hard coded integrations, taking these very fragile APIs, and ultimately being able to get to a higher level of integration where you can say, and in the business systems to say, I want to turn a PR into a PO, or I want to take an RFQ and turn it, multi-round bidding event. And I just want to say it conversationally at a high level. And then the AI is like, got it. Well, I know that you're running 6 different business systems, some ERP, some S2P. I know the dialects that they speak. I know what's required for them. I know that one doesn't have it. So I need to either write it myself, or
Hmm.
they do that translation. And so if you look at, some of the things that are happening now in, agentic, whether it's around A to A or model context protocol, MCP, it's
Hmm.
all about linking these low level integrations and APIs up to higher levels of abstraction so that you can now, and this is the next generation systems will be writing to these kind of data models that are not in one vendor, but it's to a general purpose object, so it's a virtual vendor master or, bill of material or whatever
Hmm.
it is. And underneath the covers, the tech helps you build the deterministic tooling that actually integrates to all that stuff underneath. So now you basically have a, supplier information management functionality built right in. And it's built right in because the AI helps you do that mapping between the modeling of the business processes and the user and the data to tools and all those and basically all the apps that need to be cared and fed for until they're replaced by the next generation systems. And that was always the problem with RPA, very fragile, the integration, keeping it
Yeah.
running. So yeah.
Fragile. That's the word that I had also heard, is that you would build one of these automations, and then the minute that a software vendor changes a pixel, then all of a sudden you have to go and reconnect the pipes. In a weird way, it kind of seems like it would stifle innovation, because if you're like, hey, I'm worried that if I take one step, I'm gonna be a bull in a china shop on RPA, then nobody wants to do it. So I think it makes perfect sense that LLMs can make that process more robust. Um, it is interesting. So I guess a question I'm curious about, though, is at what point do we RPA away people versus enhance them to do more stuff, right? So there's two possible futures, or maybe they're both the future, just at different timescales. One is saying, hey, we're going to take people that we have in our organization and we're going to supercharge them with AI tools so they can do the work of like 10 people. There's another mindset where some companies come to the market and they say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to build we're competing with people. So if you think about in the case of customer service, companies like Diagon are, is that what it's called? Diagon, right? Yeah, Diagon. They were trying to replace folks who are actually at these call centers with with AI agents, like customer service agents, not agentic agents. I guess they're both, but But where do you think is the role for like human enhancement versus replacement in the procurement space or supply chain more
Well, I
broadly?
mean, yeah, well, I think, you've highlighted it. Just you can look to analog areas, right, where you can just
Yeah.
already see it proving it out, right? So customer support, right? You can say, well, that's like procurement help desk, right? Or any kind of shared
Mm,
service, any kind of business function, that's supporting, the business units, right? So, and basically managing that knowledge and the FAQs and the triage and
mm,
the interaction, you're building a knowledge base, right? And
right.
you're helping the humans, and whether you're deploying that right out to the end users or whether it's through a COE or, whatever it is, that's great. It's a knowledge management exercise. And yeah, it's just going to make them more productive, and you're going to need to hire less of them. And maybe there's going to be some, reduction in workforce that's needed because people are just not as busy, right? But you see this also, you come from the manufacturing world. It's the same thing in manufacturing, right? When you go to more highly automated environments and this question of, oh, we're going to replace the people with robots. Well, yeah, I mean, when you're going to bring in more sophisticated automation, and whether it's purpose built human, like, the Japanese mindset around flexible manufacturing and building small machine tools and all that, or whether it's the larger robotic systems, or whether, I mean, you worked at Tesla, the mega, system, it's gonna
Yeah.
have an impact on labor, right? And you're gonna have to take resources out that are no longer capable of kind of being upskilled to b them, to kind of be the
Mhm.
transformers or the work centers themselves, right? And so,
Yeah.
the same with procurement, and
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, my only pushback on this concept of workforce replacement and procurement is that I feel that the cost of the person relative to the amount of dollar value that's being spent
right,
is very
totally.
small. And so, when I used to be at Waymo, as you remember, and I remember I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who were building different autonomous vehicles, right? So Waymo was looking to replace the driver and build a ride share like an Uber or Lyft without a driver. And in that case, the driver is like the biggest expense. So it makes perfect sense to try to automate. Um, and there's also experience improvement that I'll talk about my opinions on later. The second kinds of examples I would see is people would say, okay, what if we could make autonomous shipping container uh, boats? And I remember thinking like that sounds like not a good idea because maybe you could add sensors and hardware and software to help facilitate autonomy on a transatlantic cargo ship, but there's $300 million of goods on there, and the labor of the people, even if you had 5 or 10 or 20, it's a rounding error versus the cost of the goods. I feel like there is like some in my mind. I have this a visualization, which is like the ratio of the cost of the human versus the potential impact one way or another. And in procurement, it feels like, okay, well, I know teams of, I was on site on Tuesday with a team that's like 7 people managing like, $1.4 billion of spend or 2 billion of spend, something like that. And so you'd think, okay, actually don't reduce those people, just like get higher quality people and give them more tooling. So I'm kind of curious how that sits with you.
Well, I've been involved in the procurement benchmarking area for a very long time, and I would say that you're absolutely right. And there's not a function that probably has a higher ROI than, procurement, in terms of it's literally 5x, 7x, 10x, right? So you're like, well, if I'm comparing that payback versus my cost of capital, I'm like,
Yeah.
that seems like a pretty good investment area. Now you can get into, well, procurement's cherry picking. Do we believe the numbers? It's the whole system around savings. You get into this whole, dialogue. But regardless, I mean, even if it's 2x or 3x, it's like, wow, we should really move on the I, increase the I, and give them better tools. And let's get it to 5x, 10x, 20x just through creating more savings, revenue enhancement, working, whatever it is, right? Just create more value to give those resources better opportunity. It's so funny. I was involved when I was doing, like, this is classic, right? When I was
Hmm.
doing a benchmarking project, and this was back, when I was originally at Hackett, and it was like, we're telling this large, defense company, and we're like, they're like, "Why are you spending all your time telling us about all this money that we're spending on P2P and this transactional stuff when all the value is in the strategic area?" And we're like, Yeah, because you're spending about 60% of your budget on that low impact, stuff. So you're
Mm,
basically wasting its expense in, over half of your money that you're given versus actually creating investment, right? And the difference between
mm,
expense and investment is that it's not just PO processing, you're actually finding new opportunities for value creation. And
mm.
obviously, the direct side is where the value opportunities open up a lot more because now you're talking about products and revenue and et cetera. So yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think that's a great point
Mm.
that you made.
It's interesting. Do you feel like there is a difference between the desire to automate the role in direct versus indirect? Because I feel like we've seen some of these sort of automation, autonomous sourcing solutions, but they've always been very tail spend oriented. Like anything that is the unmanaged, the island of misfit toys, the unmanaged of the unmanaged of the unmanaged, because that's where it's a no brainer. Um, versus direct, we've always considered as managed. So I'm kind of curious if you feel like there's the role of automation is actually maybe still uniform, or if there's actually really different ways that people should think about this stuff for direct versus indirect versus tail.
Yeah, in fact, forgive me if this is heresy, but I'm gonna maybe ignore the direct and indirect distinction for now.
That's
I would
okay.
say low complexity versus high complexity, right? Because on the tail spend, that's it. That's indirect, and it's goods, and it's more simple, and it is easier to automate because you can build business rules around it. You can, and increasingly on the service side, you can kind of catalogize those things. You can build out your AVLs and, kind of keep things relatively simple. And it's kind of lower spend. It's not as critical. On the direct side, you also have C parts, right? You also have things
Mm,
that are less strategic. And there are places where, you're making allocation decisions, right? So coming out of a supply planning run, I have what are my best allocations? Well, you can build business rules in there and you can do some it's kind of like tailspin, to kind of do some more tactical sourcing, almost three bids and a buy. And you can do that in business rules or do that actually do three bids and a buy, right? If
yeah,
it's like
of
two
course.
equivalent parts. So I think you can do that autonomous sourcing on simpler direct stuff as well, but it also does help on the most strategic, direct, areas because of either mega market baskets and the complexity of that, and hey, the more we can apply automation, right, and use AI to help with that, that's a good thing, even if it's just helping the bidders, you know, participate in the event, understand what they're doing, get better outcomes in the execution of it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
I don't know. What's your thought?
No, I think it is interesting. I like the idea of getting away from direct and indirect as the main, because it is very much like an accounting driven distinction, because COGS is direct and SG&A is indirect. It's consumed by the business versus going into the product for the customer. But I will say that you are right. And when I think about how we market our business, we always say that we do direct and strategic indirect. But what we don't really focus on is tactical or tail indirect. And it's funny because some of the most complicated events are not the direct material. Some of the most complicated are the really large indirect packaging, logistics with scenarios and constraints and award optimization.
Yeah, energy, renewables, renewable energy, really complicated.
Huge. I mean, I can only imagine how strategic it is buying GPUs right now. That is a full domain. You should hire someone just to do that, maybe teams of people just to do that if you're at one of these hyperscalers. And so we don't draw that distinction, but it is interesting. Like I think with you know I, it's sort of hard for me to have like a very concrete opinion on this because I think automation is easier as you go simpler. So tail, three bids and a buy. There was this, you don't want to spend $10 worth of a person's effort to buy a $5 stapler. That was the classic OG Ariba example. You're spending 20 bucks to buy or 50 bucks to buy a stapler. And so there, the problem that people should solve is like, how do you transact as easily and quickly as possible and just get the stuff and then don't worry about it. But the prize is still significantly bigger on the large scale sourcing side, right? If you think about direct and the large strategic indirect, you know, you're never going to optimize the tail enough to make a difference when you can make like a small change there and it yields huge results. But it's more difficult to automate. And so I don't think people have looked at it as much. But yeah, the other, I guess I would say the other, I'm sort of losing my train of thought, to be honest. But
Well, I mean, I'll just jump in while you're thinking about that.
yeah, sure.
One of the beauty around direct is that the supply chain really focuses your mind in a very structured way. At the end of the day, products are going to go to customers and they're going to be profitable
Yeah,
or unprofitable, right? And everything is synchronized to standing up the supply chain and the cash invested in it to get those products to be sold profitably and to build, all the IP and stuff that you want into them. So in a sense, direct and the supply chain is a very bounded and deterministic thing, but it's also very complicated, right? In terms of
yeah,
all the relationships between costs and risk and resources and, all that
yeah,
stuff, cost elements, right? So it is a very rich data model and knowledge model upon which to apply the analytics and AI and things like that. So it is inherently more complicated, but it is very deterministic. And that is the beauty that I've always loved. I come from a supply chain background, like a lot of
interesting.
people, you kind of fall into procurement because you're like, friggin' procurement. I mean, come on, doing deals and pushing POs.
Yeah,
I'm into network design, right? I'm into, the really strategic stuff. And if you look at procurement in the right way, it is kind of how do you design an extended supply network,
yeah.
rather than just, kind of, point in time episodic sourcing around whatever,
Yeah, it's
part.
interesting. I mean, the point that I was gonna make and I forgot about it, but I've regained my sentiency is, is the question of whether, you know, autonomous sourcing is truly preferred by suppliers. I think that's been a big claim that's been made, but the earliest case studies we've seen of tail automation that have been alleged to be successful have really been with companies like Walmart at that scale, where Walmart could say, suppliers will even physically move to will physically move offices to Arkansas, to Bentonville, in order to better serve Walmart. So of course they will negotiate with a
Right.
bot.
Right.
But you know, I remember I was talking with Ben, our head of marketing, 2 days ago or yesterday, and he said that once he had an AI virtual assistant, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, and I tried it once, and we both remember people getting really furious about it. Like, if I'm going to dedicate my time, I don't want to be scheduling with a bot. I want to be scheduling with a person, or book it myself directly. So I'm kind of curious. You know, do you think, you know, how do you think about autonomous sourcing? Do you feel like it is exclusively the domain of the largest of enterprises? Could it apply to everybody? Do suppliers actually like it? Or is that marketing stuff, you know?
Yeah, my gosh, there's a lot in there, right, in terms of
No.
autonomous sourcing, right? I mean, one is kind of the sourcing strategy, category strategy, setting up the right design, setting up the right playbooks, thinking through negotiation. What is the best formats for this? How do we best lot the items? And this is kind of optimization and kind of scenario planning and things like that, right? So there's a lot of this upfront stuff that is really important, independent of like before you even get to talking to the suppliers. Although if you do it right, yeah, I mean, you do something like, and I just pick kind of the sourcing optimization. The thing that technology is useful for is just opening up the market basket and then saying, Barry, pick the crap out of it. Do whatever you can do. Give me bundled bids. Give me whatever optimizes your cost structure, right?
Hmm.
And then we'll kind of layer that stuff in, apply some constraints, and see what the market can really tell us, right? And then we'll figure out kind of how to do the final, kind of how do we set up the events and do the negotiations of it. And then in terms of the supplier payback, I don't have enough good data on it, right? I get definitely different
Yeah.
experience around it, but I'm generally in agreement with you that suppliers are old hands, right, at seeing what buyers presents to them. So they've seen all the tricks in the book, right? They've seen this so many times before. They have their playbooks, right? They know what they're going to do. So they can pretty much size you up based on just how you're in. And, it's pretty obvious whether you're going to be interacting with a bot or not quite often, right?
Hmm.
We see that with that, buyers getting, AI driven RFP responses from the tech suppliers. Now we get them, right, as analysts. And I'm like, come on, dude, that is so obviously AI generated. It's like you're literally insulting me. We've had a relationship, and actually, humans racking and stacking this stuff. And so I get offended, right, when I see this stuff. So the suppliers are going to they can see through a lot of it. So you better do it right around, to your point, enabling those buyers to be better about how they campaign these things and be
Hmm.
smart around the decision support and all that, and yeah, it's going to vary based on the nature of
Yeah,
the
it's interesting. I mean, I feel in a way that the sort of automated sourcing is kind of like a form of virtual e-auction. It's like someone described it as a haggle bot, but I think that there is, you can sort of have, if you have a bunch of bots negotiating in RFP or RFQ situations and they're talking to each other, you're eventually basically using information from all of these to run effectively what becomes an auction. So I'm kind of curious, like, have you seen I feel like there are flavors that come and go. And there was a period of time where e-auction was like hugely popular. Tons of people were doing it. Whether it was free markets, Commerce One, Ariba. There were so many auction platforms, and it felt like it went the way of the dodo for a while. Now I'm hearing a little bit more about e-auctions than I did 5 years ago. Um, What's the supplier perspective on that? Is that something that suppliers are open to? Why do you think e-auctions went away, and why do you think that they're sort of starting to creep back in? And is that a small trend, or is that, do you think, going to become a mega trend?
Well, you've also packed in 6 or 7 questions right there again, Spencer. So let me go back in time, and
Yeah,
my compadre Jason Bush came from free markets, and
yeah,
and we, when I was at AMR Research, which became Gartner, we analyzed free markets, when they started getting into the software business versus just kind of running the reverse auctions as
yeah.
a service for companies, right? So I would just say that there was that dot-com era where the executives were really enamored with downward price auctions. It's just a great boardroom sell, right? You just watch that price going down, and free markets was great at like hooking the CFOs, and see they brought him into the
Yeah.
war room and the whole thing. And, you just look at the money real time that you're saving, right? So there's a gamification. So there's that piece of it, right? And so if there is some margin to, if there's some fat, yeah, you can certainly do that. But there's also the winner's curse, right? You're going to get the fact that that people are going to get the bidders get caught up in it as well, right? And they end up
Okay.
kind of stepping their bounds, or they're like, "Well, I'm gonna just do it to win the business, and then I'll creep up my costs later after I kind of, win the business." So, but at the end of the day, that technique of just saying, of the buyer saying, here's here is the lot that I'm going to present to you. Here's a form fit function. Everything is held constant, and the only variable that I'm really deciding on is price, and I'm going to do that in a downward synchronous, real time event. Just think about how much value space you're destroying by collapsing that down into a little approach without actually listening to what the market can offer you by
Hmm.
starting with innovation, opening this up, and then getting into things like the techniques around combinatorial optimization, which is really scenario planning and opening up that market basket, and then actually going and figuring out the best event, and then whether it's Dutch or Japanese or whatever the event flavor is. So anytime you're doing like a format like that, a bidding format, it should be well thought out, right? And you should always start with, how do I maximize the overall value pie? Because I did a study on this actually 20 years ago, and I found that the combinatorial auctions really outperformed the straight up reverse auctions by a fair amount. And this was limited to transportation, some direct, but
What is a combinatorial auction? Like, what does that mean?
so what does that mean? What that means is you are letting the suppliers bid on whatever set of combinations of bids that they want, you put out basically a big market basket. So say in direct, right? I'm going to take
Mhm.
all of the, you know, kind of electronic components or whatever, and I'm going to put them all into one basket, and I'm going to give it to a distributor. I'm going to give it to a manufacturer. Just, this is what I need in total. And obviously it's most popular, and not obviously, but like in transportation where I'm like, here are all the transportation services that I need to connect to, to do volume from here to here. That is my market basket of requirements. And rather than be like, well, I'm going to take this lot and this lot, and I think I'm going to bundle that, and then I'm going to reverse auction. So now I'm going to have 50 reverse, and I'm thinking about how to do that. No, no, you don't do that. You actually start and just say, open it up, let everybody bid on what they can to optimize their cost structure because you're going to like, this is a win-win, right? I want you to win. I don't want you to just overbid because if you don't, the supplier doesn't know how much business they're going to win, right? In these things, right? And
Yep.
so across multiple lots, right? And if it's a big one, they're going to be like, well, shit, it's winner take all. Pardon my French on this. Shoot, it's winner take all. So I better say, oh yeah, I can do that. And meanwhile, I'm scrambling to like find other people to help supply, and then I'm just going to mark and pass it on to you. So that's no good. So it's actually just letting the supply market speak to you by letting suppliers bid in multiple ways. And then you use basically combinatorial optimization to figure out what is the optimal allocations that I have of these items to those suppliers, given these constraints to maximize my objective function of total cost of service and whatever. And you play around with those things, right? It's scenario planning. So
It's a very complex. It's a very sophisticated way to approach sourcing, but it also is a complexity that I think is hard for many people to grok on both sides, right? If I'm a supplier, it's hard to think about like what is a market basket proposal that I'd be happy with, and then on the procurement side, how do I do those constraints in a way that's reasonable, because I might look at it and say, hey, there's an incumbent and I have a slight preference for them. I think it's slightly less risky to have a US supplier. I think it's slightly preferred for me if they take these payment terms. So you have this really complex TCO that you have to consider. In
right, but
addition,
isn't it better to have both parties be smarter about that and ask themselves those questions about what are my constraints? What is the sensitivity analysis? How important is that to me? What is the profit margin, that the revenue tied to that component? And it's like, well, I better get my cost models in order. And for the suppliers, it's like
yeah,
all you're doing to them is just like, here's the market basket. Just bid on what you want, right? And if you want to bundle them, great. If you just want to give me separate bids for each one, no problem. We're going to keep it simple, right? And it's whatever happens, you're a winner. Everybody's a winner, right? Because you just
everybody's a
want
winner.
to win.
You get a participation trophy no matter what.
That's
Okay,
right.
last question. Then I know we're over time, so I'll let you hop off. What is one company in procurement, not in procurement, tech company that you've seen a demo from recently that you're really impressed by? And it can't be LightSource.
Well, that's a question that I should probably recuse myself from answering. But let me just state what type of technology is exciting me most, and what
Okay,
is
that's also fine.
right. So the technology that is exciting me most is the area around um, ontologies and data modeling and data management, and knowledge graphs are a way to model that. And when I was talking about that whole area around neural and symbolic, I think there's a whole in between. I did this whole DPW presentation, or anybody who's interested, just reach out to me. I'm
Yeah,
happy to
sure.
send you my deck. It is about kind of taking the richness around neural modeling and LLMs, and using the power of that where appropriate to interact with and to create deterministic tooling and to create next generation applications. And you see glints of it in data fabric, composable apps, these kind of things around the analytics space. You see a lot of it around just what's happening within MCP and agentic around the abstraction and that ability to kind of hide complexity and manage it explicitly versus, like, for example, just simple punch out. Oh, I go out to supplier website and I can shop there and bring it back. Well, that is like, sounds really easy, but one of the problems with it is that's just an XML protocol, and you can pass all sorts of parameters and there's no semantic definition. So getting semantic structure and being able to bridge that gap between this wonderful world of the LLMs and agents and agentic to that deterministic tooling side and creating this next generation of applications that actually are using ontologies and knowledge management. I mean, the best example in the market to me is Palantir. Now you
Mm,
can say whatever you want about, feel about whatever you want about Palantir, but their platform around modeling ontologies and all the tooling around that. And yeah, it's more in kind of a services metaphor. But if you're going to copy an architecture, I know you guys have a lot of common attributes with, them. That's a good place to start because they are so focused. And any company that is really focused on the data and the knowledge, because ultimately AI is about taking knowledge and tools and turning those into skills that you can apply.
mhm,
Knowledge
mm,
requires a knowledge model, and a knowledge model is as much neural as it is deterministic. It's around semantics as well as structure. So
yeah,
bringing those things. So that technology area around this next gen of apps that brings neural and symbolic together, to me, that's the game changer. And if you start bringing in open source and other things, that is now going to be a massive driver versus just, hey, look at the power of the late of GPT-5.
right.
Yes, it's now a trillion times what my brain can do versus a billion. That's not the problem anymore, right? It's now implementing it, right, in the tooling that we have.
Interesting, interesting. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation, Pierre. Always so good to chat, and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, Spencer. And by the way, happy birthday. I hope you enjoy your cake that's waiting for you there in the office. I hope they have a nice, big surprise party waiting for you. And
Yeah, I
just
hope
want
so too.
to
Hint, hint, everybody. If I went
Spencer's
downstairs,
coming, everybody.
I'm coming. It's like, yeah, it'll be all the employees downstairs would be the great surprise, so that they've got
Yeah, they're already drinking. That's all I can say, right? I'm sure they're
as
already
long as
having a
there's
good time.
one cake
So
left, then I'll be happy. I'll feel like I've come out ahead. Maybe what it'll end up being is the cake has been eaten except for the part that says Spencer on the top, that like take the
nice.
rest.
Yeah, there you
Maybe
go.
I'll get that. It's like, hey, we were really hungry and we couldn't wait for you to finish talking with Pierre. So
You can this way you can have your cake and eat it too. So
yeah. All right, I'll talk to you later. Have a great rest of
all
your
right,
night.
see you much. That's
Bye.
great. All right.